When she died at 98, I thought, Mama, I never really knew you. An only child, she once wore fine flapper dresses, silk stockings and high heels, her hair in soft finger waves. She danced to Glenn Miller, kept her cigarettes in an elegant case. She tried to turn me into a lady, but I resisted her fussing, running barefoot through the farm in jeans and a t-shirt. She'd sigh and say, but you'd be so much more attractive if you'd just. As a child, I escaped in the pages of books and on horseback. As a young woman, I never wanted a life anything like hers, so I flew from that potato farm in rural Oregon to New York City for school in 1963, joined protest movements in San Francisco, dropped acid, swam in the sea of drugs, sex, and rock and roll. Throughout, I wrote her earnest letters explaining the anti-war and civil rights movements. She kept them. Mother, who always said, Nixon was a good man, he was just hounded by the press. Once she came to San Francisco and we drove up the California coast together, walked on the beach, ate abalone and blackberry cobbler. She started this trip saying, Sarah, I've been reading in the Ladies' Home Journal about people who smoke marijuana, that they dress sloppy and use bad language. I think you've been using drugs. I laughed across the chasm between us, not having a clue how much love and courage it took for her to make this trip. Yet being with her helped me feel the roots I needed to get back on solid ground. When she returned to the farm, she wrote, I'm afraid I talked too much and listened too little. I really only wanted you to know I love you. When she was a young woman, my grandmother Susie took her to see an old psychic reputed to be powerful. She was told only, you'll marry the wrong man, have a very small life. And so she did. I never wanted to be anything like my mother, but I too married the wrong man. I thought myself adventurous and free. Years later, I dreaded breaking my silence about domestic violence, fearing she'd say, I told you so. Instead, she looked at me and said, oh, Sarah, the mistakes I've made in my life, you'll never hear me say those words. As long as I have life and breath, you don't have to live like this. My parents' 59-year marriage was a Cold War with periodic attempts to divorce. One of these landed her in a psychiatric hospital in 1961. I wasn't told then about the shock treatments. I only knew that she'd been suicidal, that a drawer in the bathroom was full of sleeping pills and tranquilizers. When she returned to the farm, dazed and confused, I cared for her as tenderly as my 17-year-old self possibly could. I fervently didn't want to be like her, but I didn't want to lose her. She knew early that her marriage was a mistake, but when my sister was 2 years old, she became pregnant with me. You were the nail in my coffin of that marriage. I knew I was stuck. When I left my marriage, I didn't hear from her for several weeks, and then a letter came saying, I've been depressed because you did what I didn't have the courage to do. I wrote back saying she couldn't compare 1961 with 1985, that I had the support of the battered women's movement, Wisconsin marital property law, therapy, Al-Anon, and a graduate school traineeship. I was deeply disappointed in her when I gave birth to my daughter and adopted my son. She simply didn't know how to be supportive, and I was so used to going it alone, I didn't know what I was missing. When she called to say, my friends are asking if I'm going to be with you when you have the baby, do you want me to come? I said no. She seemed relieved. Still, we stayed connected. When I didn't have money for long-distance calls, I concentrated on her, and soon she'd call saying, I was just thinking about you. After I divorced, I flew to Oregon almost every summer for a week at the ocean with her. She loved to walk on the beach, eat seafood, watch the waves. This was where my children and I enjoyed her. As she aged, my sister and I shepherded her through various stages of decline, arranged care and supportive environments. When we closed her last apartment, I told her caregiver, Linda, that Mother had never known I was lesbian. Linda looked at me in surprise and said, "Your mother told me the first days I was with her that you were lesbian." Mom told her my daughter Sarah had a bad marriage, divorced, and now lives as she wants with a woman. I shook my head. Linda also told me that she'd heard Mother talking to another woman in the retirement facility about that woman's gay grandson and Mother's lesbian daughter. I wept, surprised by an acceptance I longed for but never expected. Thank you.